I always had hopes of having a family. That was like the biggest thing in the world to me. I wanted to be a dad. I wanted to be a husband, and I just wanted to have everything that, you know, a good guy would want out of life. When I was younger, my parents went through a divorce, and it was hard for a while. My mom had me and my sister and basically took care of us by herself. And I saw the pain and the hurt that she went through, and from that day on, I swore that I would never do that to anybody, ever.
I guess Isaiah felt like, well, my mom and dad didn't work out, so I want to make sure that when I do have somebody, it's going to be forever.
I vowed to myself that I would be the best version of me that I could be and treat whoever I was with like they were everything. Lucky for me, my stepfather, Patrick, was always great to me and my sister, and you know, he always treated us like we were his own.
I was working up in the detective squad in 106 one day. Valerie came in, she was a patrol officer downstairs, and she came in with a complaint report that's filled out for a crime. And she sees a picture on my desk, and she turns around and goes, "Who's that?" I go, "It's my son." It's like, gosh, just hook a girl up.
26-year-old Valerie Cincinnati is a single mother, making a name for herself with the NYPD.
She caught an armed robber. She received Officer of the Month award multiple times.
My stepfather was like, okay, you know, he called me and he was like, hey, you know, there's this girl that I work with and she wants to get to know you.
Valerie comes up again, so I went onto my laptop and logged on to Facebook I had at the time. I said, well, Mike, here's his Facebook page. And she went on right in front of me, and all she put down, I remember it. And she goes, hey, this is Valerie, I work with your dad. This is my number, give me a call.
Isaiah perks up when he sees Valerie's message and responds immediately.
Initially, we were gonna go out, just me and her. She had a last-minute cancellation from a babysitter and couldn't get anybody. When I got there, she came outside and yeah, I was blown away. I was like, wow, she's beautiful. She brought me into the apartment and she was like, you're gonna meet my daughter. And I remember seeing Sophia and being like, wow, she's the most adorable little girl I've ever seen in my life. And she took to me instantly, and we were playing with a ball and we were playing catch and rolling it on the floor, and she was running up to me. I thought, wow, maybe I can have a family of my own. And this would be a great start to it. And then we set up our second date. I met her at a bar, and I met her friends, and her friends liked me, and they were like, yeah, he's great, he's so nice, and I think he'll be good for you. We were outside in front of the bar, and she kissed me. And it was a very long and sensual kiss, and we basically lost in each other.
Over the next few months, Isaiah and Valerie become exclusive.
We went on vacations together. We would take Sophia to the farm. It felt like a family environment. Valerie was very loving and would call me 100 times a day and tell me I love you or I miss you. And I just felt like I was on top of the world.
Almost a year into their relationship, Isaiah decides it's time to introduce Valerie to his extended family.
I invited her to Easter dinner at my mom's.
He goes, I think I really love her, Ma. You know, this is great. I found the perfect person. And I'm like, I'm happy for you. I think that's great. Don't rush into this. And he's like, no, I know. But Ma, I'm telling you, this is it.
When we arrived, Valerie, instantly, you could tell that there was something off.
Isaiah was very close with his cousin, Christina.
My cousin would watch us when my mom was working, me and my sister. I was very close to this cousin. She was kind of like a second mom to me.
Any girl that Isaiah has ever dated, he's always said, just wait until you meet my cousin. She's the one you've got to get past because she's kind of hard to please. Valerie didn't like that when it came time to meeting her.
Christina comes into the house and she says hello to everybody, and she was very polite. Valerie didn't say anything to Christina. She totally ignored her. I'm standing in the kitchen and I'm preparing things and making stuff. And all of a sudden, Christina comes into the kitchen and she turns around and she goes, "Are you kidding me?" And I said, "What's the matter?" She goes, "Is that chick for real? She is the rudest thing I've ever met." Valerie overheard her. So Valerie comes into the kitchen and it was like the biggest fight ever. All of a sudden, Valerie just starts screaming at the top of her lungs at my niece. I can't even say stuff she said.
Who does that? Who reacts that way? At a family party with people you don't know?
I felt like it was just okay, she's jealous kind of a person.
I was like, that's a side of her that I'd never seen before. I basically just brushed it to the side and we spoke about it and she apologized. You know, she offended me and I was like, okay, well, move on from this. And things got, you know, even more serious between me and her. My friend Michelle just wrote, "Happy birthday, I love you," on Facebook or something. And Valerie freaked out on me, thought I was cheating on her. I was like, no, it's not even like that. She's my best friend's wife. And she didn't want to hear it. And she said it's either me or them.
My brother had so many friends and he stopped talking to all of them when he started dating her.
Valerie ended up telling me that she wanted to get married and she wanted to have a life together. She wanted to go to this hotel in Hershey, Pennsylvania. I was like, let me call up, see if they have any availability, and I'll book it. That's exactly what I did. She opened the door and walked in and turned the lights on and saw all the roses and balloons and everything. And I was on one knee and I had the ring open. She started crying and looked at me and I couldn't even really say it. I was like, "Do you want to?" And she was like, "Yes," before I even finished the sentence. And she hugged me, kissed me, and it was a predominant moment in my life. We're planning the wedding. We had a date set. It was going to be like, I believe it was September of 2013. And during that time, it was around Valentine's Day. Me and her went out. She loved Mexican food. So I took her to a really nice Mexican restaurant and we got a little drunk, not gonna lie. And we had a great time. We got back home to the house and spent the night. And then all of a sudden, a week later, she's like, "Hey, I'm pregnant." I was excited, nervous. I couldn't believe that I was gonna have a baby of my own.
The wedding is postponed as the couple prepare for the baby.
And the doctor proceeded to tell her that it was a boy. The baby was thriving. I was excited. I was overjoyed. I was just overcome with a rush of emotions.
They decide to call their new son Salvatore.
I ended up getting the phone call that she was ready to have the baby. And I rushed to the hospital. The doctor's like, "Okay, here's the baby, he's coming." And I saw the crowning and I saw his head. I got to share that moment with my son. And it changed my life forever.
I was so happy for him, for me, see my nephew and my brother, first-time dad. Those were all exciting things. Valerie was not having it. She didn't want anybody there. She didn't speak to anybody.
I was like, maybe she'll change. Maybe everything will be fine once we get home, get in the house, and get settled. Everything will be different. It got progressively worse. It was my mom's 50th birthday, and Valerie adamantly said to me, "I don't want to go." She's like, "You have a newborn, you should stay home." And I'm like, it's my mom's 50th birthday. This is a milestone in her life. I got home and it was like 11:30, and she got into a screaming match with me and freaked out and said, why did you leave me here with our son? And we were screaming and yelling, and I got frustrated and left the room, went downstairs into the basement. So that was the first instance that I had where she called the cops on me.
I told my parents and my brother one day she's going to do something really crazy. And everybody used to say, no, she wouldn't. She's a cop. She's a good person. Well, told you.
Officer Valerie Cincinnelli of the NYPD's Domestic Violence Unit calls local police to her home after an argument with her fiancé, Isaiah.
They came into the house and come downstairs and look at me. And I'm like, why are you guys here? We were called to come here. Is everything okay? I'm like, yeah, everything's fine. We had a disagreement. She was arguing with me. And they were like, well, why didn't you just stay downstairs on the couch tonight and let things blow over? And I was like, okay, well, I planned on doing that anyway. She didn't talk to me for days. They didn't want to talk to me at all. I was truly sorry.
Eventually, the couple moves on, continuing with their plans for a beach-themed wedding.
It was a beautiful day. I remember showing up and we were taking family photos, and Isaiah, he was, again, very excited, like glowing, so happy.
As a mother, I just had that gut feeling, that instinct that it's just not gonna work.
One of her uncles came up to me and told me, run. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And this is somebody in her family telling me this. And I still brushed it to the side and paid no mind to it. The honeymoon phase lasted like probably a week and a half to 2 weeks. We didn't even go on a honeymoon. She didn't want to go. We made a decent amount of money from the wedding, and she kept every single dollar of it. So her money was her money and my money was her money. I picked up a second job working on weekends, doing estimates for my cousin's gutter company, and I was bringing home a decent amount of cash on the weekends. All the responsibility of our son was on me. Diaper changes, feeding him, baths, whatever it was, I had to do it.
Isaiah is initially successful in placating Valerie, but 3 years into his marriage, he realizes something is terribly wrong.
She started to disappear and always said she was working late or always said that she was stuck on a detail. Something in me told me that she's doing something. This is not normal. She has to be cheating on me. There has to be somebody else. I used to fill her car up. One day I took her car and something in me was like, check the car. Just look around the car real quick. And I lifted the floor mat and I found cards. And they didn't say a name on it, but you could tell that they were love cards. I ended up going home and confronting her. And she freaked out and said, those are my friend's cards. She left them in the car and I just put them there so I didn't forget where they were. I just felt like she wasn't being honest with me at all. She agreed to go to counseling with me. When we initially went to counseling, she made it seem like I wasn't doing enough. And nothing amounted to anything to her. Ever. She wanted more and more and more.
Very different than your typical couple fighting. It was anything and everything they fought about.
When we went back to the therapist was like, well, why don't you guys go on a vacation or spend some quality time together as a family? And I was like, you know what, that's a good idea. So I booked for us to go to St. Martin together. We went to an all-inclusive resort, but the whole time we were there, I slept in the living room with Sal and she slept in the bedroom with Sophia. When things didn't go so well, Valerie's main goal was to turn Sophia against me, and she made it her priority to do so. We're on a tropical island, and this is supposed to be a time for us to reconnect, and there was no reconnection.
The couple returns to Long Island, and when the NYPD throws its annual Christmas party in 2017, Valerie tells Isaiah she's going alone.
She went, and around 10 o'clock, she texted me and said, hey, on my way. 10:30 rolls around, 11 o'clock. I'm like, there's no way. Like, it doesn't take that long to leave there. I'm calling her, texting her, no answer. So I track the phone, and I see that she went a completely different route. And I see that the tracker went off. And I got the last known location of the tracker, and I went to the last known location, and I found her car. Parked behind a closed auto shop. So I proceeded to look around, walk around, look and see if I could find her or see if I could see her in the car with somebody else. She ended up finally coming home and said, oh no, I was dropping a friend off. You're crazy, you're a psychopath. And I was like, there's no way. You never told me about anybody that lived over there. She ended up proceeding upstairs into the bedroom, slammed the door closed and locked it. Now my work clothes were in there. So I'm knocking on the door like, hey, I need my work clothes. She told me that if I didn't stop knocking on the door, she was going to shoot me through the door and make it look like an accident. After that happened, we got into an argument. I confronted her again, and I told her that you're lying to me. I know something's going on. She swore up and down to me again. I don't want nobody but you. You're the only one for me. Okay, well, if you're not lying to me, and nothing happened that night, let me see your phone. If you have nothing to hide, then what's the reason that you can't show it to me? And I went to grab the phone, and she grabbed it, then it fell down and it broke the screen protector. The cops come, and they tell me to wait outside. She talks to them, tells them that she's an officer. She told them that I hit her with a belt and knocked the phone out of her hand. Cops come back outside and say there was a no tolerance for any type of domestic abuse. We got to take you in. They cuffed me and put me in the back of the car and took me to booking and kept me overnight. I felt like an empty shell. I felt broken. I had a big fear that she was going to do everything in her power to make sure that I was basically screwed.
NYPD cop Valerie Cincinnelli has just lodged a formal domestic abuse complaint against her husband, Isaiah Carvalho. Isaiah's stepfather, Detective Patrick Roach, is right by his stepson's side when Isaiah faces a judge.
When his case got called, the judge just kind of looked at me and he asked, "Is you working the same place?" I said, yes, she works in domestic violence in the next office over from mine. And he's my stepson. And he looked at me and goes, so she knows the system? I said, yes. He goes, okay. And he released him on his own reconnaissance.
The judge granted her a temporary restraining order where we could not fight. I could go back home, but I was not allowed to argue, fight, curse at her, or anything. We went to one more session of therapy. And I broke down, cried, and I was like, I'm trying to do everything that you told me to do. I took us on vacation. And the therapist is like, I don't think she's seeing anybody else. I just think that there's some type of block and there's basically nothing you can do. And I cried and she was laughing at me crying because all I wanted was us to stay together.
The next day, Isaiah comes home early from work, excited to spend some time with his son.
I walk into the house and I'm like, hey Sal, Daddy's home, hey buddy. Because he would usually come running and be like, hey Daddy, be so excited. And nothing. So I'm like, Sophia? Nothing.
Valerie appears, and after a heated argument, she tells Isaiah that Sal is at a friend's house, and she's on her way to pick him up.
Okay, well, I'll follow you to wherever he is, and I'll take him for the day. She got in the car, I followed her a little bit, and all of a sudden, here comes a squad car. And the cops, they told me, well, listen, you know, we had a complaint that you were following her and that she felt threatened, but they ended up arresting me for the second time.
But this time, the judge is less lenient.
He ended up issuing a full stay-away order of protection. So now not only was I not allowed to go into the house or be with my son, everything that I owned and everything that I had was there.
Isaiah moves out and files for divorce, but the consequences are devastating.
The law guardian granted her residential custody instead of giving 50-50 custody. I was not allowed to see my son for 4 months. I had to go to court for visitation. When I finally retained my lawyer and told her what happened, she said that we were going to have a hard time trying to get Sal.
He didn't want to be a part-time dad. So it was really hard for him.
I went to go drop him off one time, bring him back home, and I went with 2 female officers. I go to the door, and Sal's screaming bloody murder. Valerie basically had to rip him out of my arms. She couldn't get him to let go. And it infuriated her, and she slammed the door in my face while I was holding Sal with the officers present and told me to keep him. A week later, I get a phone call from a sergeant from that precinct saying that if I didn't bring Sal back, he was gonna have me arrested. I was like, what are you talking about? She told me to keep him. She slammed the door with 2 of your officers present. And she tried to say that I kidnapped him. And I ended up having to bring him back again. She completely broke me down in every way that you could possibly break somebody down.
With Valerie having sole custody of his son Sal, Isaiah feels like he's in his darkest hour. And then, there's a ray of hope.
I was working one day, and I get a text on my phone that says, you may want to call this guy John, here's his number. He has information that'll help your son with his divorce. So I didn't know what the number was. Text that person back, okay, thanks, who is this? And it said, don't worry about who it is, friend of the department. And curiosity killed the cat. So I stopped by and met this guy, John Deruba, at his house. He opens up his laptop and he starts showing me pictures of my son. And he goes, I'm dating Valerie. I said, you're dating Valerie? He's like, yeah. He started to explain that when Isaiah would drop off Sal, that she would come in, she'd start crying, telling what a monster he is, he'd beat me. So he would follow Isaiah thinking he's following some kind of an abusive husband, you know, a monster. And he told me that there was one time she was up in the shower, he grabbed her phone and went through her phone. And he noticed text messages from Isaiah to Valerie saying that he wanted to keep the family together, we should go to counseling, let's make this work. And he realized, wait a minute, this isn't the monster she's telling me about, this is a guy that wants his family back. So now he felt really guilty on everything that was going on.
John asks to meet Isaiah, and when they do, Isaiah learns why he and Valerie failed to reconnect when they went on vacation.
He showed me photos of when we went to St. Martin. There was pictures that Valerie sent him, dirty pictures of her in bikinis. He told me they got matching tattoos that said till death, that they were gonna be together till death, her and him. The night of the Christmas party when she went missing and I was looking for her, John told me that they were in the car across the parking lot watching me the whole time. Part of the motivation for him to come forward, that they were having problems. He just wanted to do the right thing and try to help me to get Sal. And all the time that he should have been spending with me, he was with this guy and not his own father. And that tore me apart. That destroyed me.
Although John promises to help Isaiah get custody of his son, he never delivers.
He ended up going back and getting back with her.
Valerie had a way about her that made guys fall for her. I don't know how. I don't know why. But she was good at what she was doing.
I made an offer for custody of Sal and $50,000 for the renovations I did in the house and the money that I put into the house and the rings back. She declined my offer, and my lawyers proceeded to say, okay, well, if you decline the offer, we're gonna go after everything. I was entitled to her pension, deferred comp, her 401k, the increased value of the house, and when those numbers came back, they were substantially greater than the offer that I had originally presented. She did not take lightly to that because she didn't even want to give me $1. Because, again, her money was her money.
Isaiah has no idea just how far Valerie will go to keep her money.
I started getting text messages from someone else that was totally out of the blue. You really need to do something about Valerie. She wants to hurt Isaiah.
They said, we don't know how to tell you this, but she wants to have you killed. Yeah, I am scared.
Detective Patrick Roach has been warned by an anonymous tipster that fellow officer Valerie Cincinnelli intends to harm his stepson, Isaiah.
I would get texts that Valerie's getting very frustrated. She doesn't understand how Isaiah is staying 5 steps ahead of her.
Isaiah moves in with his parents for protection.
He'd always call me when he was on the road, and I'd always give him a different way to go home. He always changed it up.
But Isaiah is all alone one morning when an alarming situation arises.
All of a sudden, I see this car come speeding down the block and literally skid stop in front of my house. 2 guys in suits get out of the car and tell me that, that they're federal officers and to not run, and I'm scared for my life at this point. And without even preparing me or breaking it to me slowly, they were like, your wife hired a hitman, she wants to have you killed, and we gotta go fake your death right now. I couldn't believe it. I was blown away. I called my stepfather and I told him, listen, there's 2 guys who are posing to be FBI agents. And he's like, wake your mother up, tell her to come downstairs.
I started crying and I was like, oh my God, what do you mean, a hit out? Could not believe it. She wants him dead, but she's hiring someone to do it. Was totally shocked. Yeah, I think the girl's crazy, but would have never in a million years thought that she would be capable of wanting to kill somebody.
I was like, where's my son? He's at school. There's a FBI agent there, and you're gonna get him later.
The FBI learned about the plot to kill Isaiah from a source close to Valerie.
John DeRuba came to the FBI with some recordings that he made of Valerie. He also stated to the FBI that she provided him with $7,000 to give to a hitman to make this happen.
She wanted me dead because she didn't want me to show up to court. She didn't want me to get any money from her.
Valerie also doesn't want to share John DeRuba.
She wanted to have John DeRuba's 14-year-old daughter taken out as well. The reason she said that she wanted to have her taken out was because she was getting in the way. She thought that John was gonna, do everything according to her beck and call, including killing his own daughter, because he was that in love with her.
I think that if Valerie didn't add his daughter to the list of people she wanted dead, that my son would be dead right now.
An agent posing as the hitman John hired has already met with Valerie to discuss payment for the job.
There was a form of payment with $7,000 in gold coins.
Now they need to provide proof of Isaiah's death to John DeRuba, who is standing by, in on the plan.
And they took me over to the marina near my house, and they had me sit in my car, and they had me fake my death. They put glass all over me and all over the floor, and they had me hunched into the passenger seat. And they took pictures of me. So now I'm presumed dead. It was the most surreal thing I've ever been through in my life.
My husband came home and two of us are in the house and they had agents watching, we don't know where, but you know, they were watching the house and everything, and we were just waiting and waiting and waiting.
I was nervous, I was pissed, I was upset because I blame it on myself that I brought this to the family. You know what, should have kept your mouth shut. You know, when Valerie turned around and said, oh, who's that? You know.
The FBI sends this photo to John Daruba so he could present it to Valerie, and at the time, John Daruba has a body-worn camera and could record what her reaction was to the photo.
He just texted me.
Are you kidding me?
Oh my God.
John got the text and opened it up and said, oh my God. It's Isaiah, he's dead, it's done. And Valerie went ballistic.
Why would he text you that? Is he stupid?
Oh my God.
Why would he text you that?
I don't know, I'm gonna erase it quick.
Are you dumb?
I'm just gonna erase everything. I'm gonna throw the phone away.
It'll show that he sent you this. Are you kidding me? I said 10 days they could subpoena messages.
They're not gonna...
She's like, you're an idiot. Why would he send you that? Why would they do that? Like, they can come and get us.
You don't think that they're going to subpoena my and your text messages? Is this guy...
The staged hit of Isaiah is extremely important for the case because it's showing that it wasn't just a thought or something that Valerie might have just wanted. It's the investigators trying to show that the intent was there, because she's actually telling him to get rid of a photo of her estranged husband's supposed dead body, which wouldn't be normal behavior for someone who's not involved in a crime.
Are you Valerie Cincinnati?
What's going on?
Two police officers arrive at Valerie's door and tell her that Isaiah's body was discovered at the marina.
Might I have your seat for me, please? I'm sorry to be the one to tell you that Isaiah was found dead.
Are you kidding me?
They asked her if she knew anybody that was out to get me, or if I had anybody that wanted to do any harm to me. And she said, no.
You don't know of anybody that would want to harm him? Anyone want to hurt your husband?
No.
You know, Crocodile teared her way through it. She's supposed to be this decorated police officer. She went to extreme lengths to have her husband taken out. And not only me, a 14-year-old girl, a child.
The FBI has just informed Officer Valerie Cincinnati that her husband, Isaiah, is dead.
10 minutes later, my phone starts ringing, my cell, and it's Valerie. And then she text messages me. And it says, Pat, please tell me it's not true. Please tell me it's not true. Oh my God, I have to get Sal from school. Please tell me it's not true. Call me. And she sent me the same message again.
What Valerie doesn't know is that her house is surrounded by FBI agents.
Valerie being an active duty police officer, there's definitely a probability that she would have a firearm in the house, have access to it, and the law enforcement's decided, you know, let's quickly take this down.
Moments later, Valerie's door is broken down, and she's taken into custody.
I found out she was arrested when they were guarding me, because they wouldn't release me until they found out that she was picked up and in custody. When I finally got back to the house and I saw my son, and I saw my son there, I finally felt like he was safe, he was good, he was finally where he should have been, he was with me. He was home.
Every time I saw her in the news or whatever, I always say, how was this person in my family? And how did she take my brother's last name, our last name? Like, what? It's wild.
4 weeks later, Valerie and Isaiah face off in court.
She screamed out, "Isaiah, you know me, I wouldn't do this." I never looked at her eyes. I didn't even look at her or anybody in her family. I had no care to. I didn't even want to be in the same room as her.
Valerie had told Isaiah she was getting ready to settle, but now the divorce is put on hold.
The day when the FBI came, a week later, we were supposed to sign the papers and be done and be divorced. The judge was like, well, now what do we do? We couldn't proceed and finalize everything because now her actions cause, I believe it's called egregious fault, where the severity of what she did causes me to be entitled to even more. And now they want me to wait until she gets out of jail to finalize my divorce. She was planning for me not to be there, for me to never even make it to get anything from her.
Valerie received Officer of the Month award multiple times. She caught an armed robber. All great things I'm sure the community appreciated. A person like me who's been in law enforcement for 19 years can't fathom why someone with such a good career for themselves going and moving in the fast path in the NYPD would even consider going down this road.
The charges were a conspiracy to commit murder on Isaiah, conspiracy to commit murder on John DeRuba's daughter, which is a teenage daughter, tampering with evidence. That carries 20 years alone, so that's like 40 years.
The DA, when I met with the district attorney and everybody, prosecutors, they told me, we don't offer deals. This is an ironclad case. This is in the bag. Months go by. We're going to court, right, for the divorce. And her criminal attorney slips and says, oh, they're offering her a deal. So my matrimonial attorney was like, what are you talking about?
Valerie claims she never paid for a hitman, and the $7,000 she gave John was just a loan to buy gold. And despite the success of the sting operation, the prosecution has no physical evidence to dispute this.
Not being able to verify that that money was ever exchanged is a problem. You want to be able to say, okay, on bank records on such and such date, $7,000 was taken out, or even half of that.
Fearing there's not enough evidence to prove conspiracy to commit murder, the DA chooses to settle.
Valerie took a plea deal for tampering with evidence, and the charges of murder for hire were dismissed.
So I'm like, well, what do you mean? I thought you told me that you had everything squared off, everything was set. Like, I had nothing to worry. I don't want that.
Prosecutors asked for 60 months. The judge gave Valerie 48 months.
It's crazy. You tried to kill my son. You tried to kill somebody else's child. You know, how could you just be in there for 48 months? That's ridiculous.
We don't know all the evidence that the FBI had, but obviously the judge does. And the judge said to her, there was no doubt in my mind, you would have saw this through. And I'll never forget this. The U.S. attorney turns around and goes, Your Honor, we offered 5 years. The judge looks at the U.S. attorney and goes, you took this plea. I don't know why you took it. If you would have taken this in a different direction, it would have been a totally different outcome. As far as I'm concerned, the U.S. Attorney's Office really screwed me, my family, and Isaiah being the victim.
I feel like they didn't even take into account the victims in this. There's nobody else that's gonna suffer but me and John's daughter. We have to worry every day when she gets out.
I don't think Isaiah feels like he's safe. I don't think Isaiah will ever feel like he's safe. I feel like for the rest of his life, he's always gonna feel that way.
And the lasting effects of Valerie's crime extend beyond Isaiah. to his children.
Sophia is with her dad. They didn't want Sal or Sophia seeing each other at all because Sal being so young, they didn't want to, have him really find out too much what's going on.
Right now, it's just a waiting game. I just have to wait and see when she gets out and finalize the divorce and hopefully be able to move on with my son and give him the life that he should always had.
It begins with a silence that feels too heavy for a city that never sleeps. New York, early 2001. The streets still hum with taxis and sirens, but beneath the noise, something has gone missing. A man leaves his apartment on a cold winter evening and never comes back. No witnesses. No struggle. No goodbye. Just an empty room, a jacket still hanging on the back of a chair, and a voicemail that cuts off mid-sentence. By morning, the city moves on. But for one family, time stops. And somewhere in the background of police files and forgotten evidence lockers, a cold case is born. The neighborhood is ordinary, almost aggressively so. Brick buildings stacked like tired soldiers. A deli on the corner that never closes. A subway entrance breathing warm air into the frozen night. This is not where people expect mysteries to begin. The missing man is ordinary too. Mid-30s. Stable job. No known enemies. No criminal record. Friends describe him as quiet, reliable, the kind of person who shows up early and leaves late. The kind of person who doesn't disappear. Yet he does. And when detectives knock on doors and scan CCTV tapes that blur faces into ghosts, the answers refuse to surface. At first, the investigation moves fast. Flyers go up. Phone lines open. Patrols retrace his last known route home. A bartender remembers serving someone who looks like him. A cab driver thinks he heard the name. Tips pour in, most of them useless, some of them cruel. A sighting in Queens. A rumor in Brooklyn. A call from out of state that leads nowhere. Each lead burns bright for a moment, then dies. Days turn into weeks. Weeks into months. The case file grows thicker, heavier, harder to carry. Eventually, it stops being passed around the squad room. It gets a label. Cold case. The community feels the shock in subtle ways. Conversations lower when his name comes up. Parents walk their kids home a little faster. The missing man's photo fades in the deli window, edges curling, colors bleaching under fluorescent light. His family keeps waiting. Waiting for a call. Waiting for a knock. Waiting for something that makes sense. They replay his last day again and again, searching for cracks. A strange tone in his voice. A routine that wasn't so routine. But memory is a dangerous witness. It changes shape every time it's questioned. Police circle back to the apartment. Nothing forced. Wallet gone, phone gone, keys gone. It looks like he chose to leave. But that theory doesn't survive scrutiny. No bank activity. No travel records. No contact with friends. He vanishes financially, digitally, socially. It's as if he steps out of the city and off the map at the same time. Investigators start asking harder questions. Who knew his schedule? Who knew his habits? Who knew him well enough to make him trust the wrong moment? Then there are the manholes. The river. The construction sites. New York is full of places where secrets can disappear forever. Searches are conducted, brief and brutal. Nothing surfaces. No body. No evidence. Just more absence. Detectives move on to newer cases, louder cases. Murders that demand attention. Crimes with blood and headlines. This one doesn't scream. It whispers. And whispers are easy to ignore. Years pass. The city changes. Towers fall. Streets are renamed. Technology advances. But the file remains the same. Paper yellowing. Photographs outdated. Witnesses harder to find. One detective keeps a copy of the case at home, a quiet obsession, flipping through it late at night, convinced something was missed. A timeline that doesn't add up. A gap that shouldn't exist. But without new information, the cold case stays frozen. The family refuses to let it die. They mark birthdays. They light candles. They speak to reporters who promise exposure and deliver silence. Each interview is a reopening of wounds. Each appeal is a gamble with hope. They learn the language of unresolved crime, persons of interest, ongoing investigation, no further comment. Words that sound official but mean nothing. Still, they wait. And then, without warning, the case stirs. It doesn't come from a tip line or a confession. It doesn't come from a dramatic discovery. It comes from a routine traffic stop. Years later, miles away, a patrol officer pulls over a car for a broken taillight. The driver is nervous. Too nervous. Papers shake. Answers come too fast. A name is run through the system. Something flags. Not a warrant. Not a hit. Just a note. An old note. Buried deep in the database. A name connected to another name. A footnote in a file no one has opened in years. The officer doesn't know the full story. He doesn't need to. Procedure takes over. The car is searched. Items are cataloged. Nothing illegal at first glance. But something feels wrong. A phone. Old messages. An alias. A date that shouldn't matter but does. The driver is released, but the information doesn't vanish. It travels upward, slowly, deliberately, until it lands on a desk in a precinct that remembers the cold case all too well. Detectives pull the file. Dust shakes loose. Photos stare back with unfamiliar faces. The name from the traffic stop appears once, briefly, almost insignificantly, as a friend of a friend, someone interviewed and dismissed early on. At the time, there was no reason to look closer. Now, with years of distance and better tools, the picture changes. Timelines are redrawn. Phone records are re-examined. Patterns emerge where chaos once lived. The suspect is brought in, casually at first. Just questions. Just routine. He answers calmly. Too calmly. His story hasn't aged well. Details clash with documented facts. Small lies surface, then larger ones. The room tightens. The past presses in. For the first time in years, the cold case breathes. But there is still no body. No definitive proof. Just circumstantial evidence stacked like a house of cards. Prosecutors hesitate. The city has seen cases collapse under less scrutiny. This one would have to be airtight. And so the investigation deepens, peeling back layers of a life that looked normal on the surface and rotted underneath. The family is notified. Carefully. Cautiously. Words like development and possible arrest are used. Hope returns, sharp and dangerous. They prepare themselves for answers they've waited decades to hear, knowing those answers might destroy what little peace they've built. The community stirs. Old rumors resurface. People remember things they forgot they knew. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the missing man's name is spoken again, no longer as a question, but as a charge. The cold case is no longer cold. It's burning. And the heat is just beginning to rise. The file opens again with a sound no one hears, but everyone feels. Paper sliding. Photos lifting. A name stepping out of the margins and into the light. The traffic stop didn't solve anything by itself. It didn't confess. It didn't bleed. It whispered. And whispers are dangerous, because they invite listening. Detectives listen now. Closely. They line the years up like dominoes and begin to push. The man from the traffic stop had been there before. Not in headlines. Not in cuffs. In the background. An acquaintance. A coworker's friend. Someone who knew the missing man's routines without ever being seen as part of his life. Back in 2001, that detail meant nothing. Everyone knew everyone in some way. New York was crowded with overlapping circles. But now, with distance, the overlap looks deliberate. Too neat. Too quiet. Phone records are pulled, resurrected from obsolete systems and archive servers. It takes time. It takes favors. It takes patience. Numbers appear. Calls that cluster around specific dates. The last date. The calls don't last long. Seconds. Missed connections. Enough to establish presence, not enough to establish content. But presence is power. Presence places people in rooms they swear they never entered. Investigators revisit the night of the disappearance. They reconstruct it not as a memory, but as a map. Streets. Times. Weather reports. Subway schedules. Security cameras that no longer exist, but once watched everything. A gap appears. 37 minutes unaccounted for. 37 minutes where the missing man's phone goes dark and the suspect's phone lights up. Not a call. A signal. A tower handshake. Two devices breathing the same air. The suspect is called in again. This time the questions are sharper. Less polite. He smiles when he shouldn't. Shrugs when silence would be safer. He explains the calls away as coincidences. Wrong numbers. Old contacts. Harmless interactions inflated by paranoia. He says he barely knew the man. Says he hasn't thought about him in years. His tone suggests closure. The room disagrees. Detectives leave him alone with his own reflection and step out to compare notes. The story doesn't collapse. It frays. Fraying is worse. It suggests repetition. A lie practiced so often it started to wear thin. They decide to push sideways, not forward. To look not at what he says, but where he's been. Addresses are pulled. Apartments he lived in, briefly, quietly, always near transit lines. Storage units rented under variations of his name. A job history with gaps that don't line up with economic reality. No one remembers firing him. No one remembers hiring him. He exists just enough to pass unnoticed. A ghost who learned how to be solid. A search warrant is requested and denied. Not enough. Not yet. The case still lacks the one thing the city demands. A body. Without it, every theory floats. Prosecutors won't bite. They've seen ambitious cases crash and burn. They want certainty. They want gravity. So detectives turn back to the missing man. They try to see him not as a victim, but as a target. What did he have that someone else wanted? Not money. Not status. Information, maybe. A relationship gone wrong. A secret held too long. They speak to old friends, coworkers who've aged out of fear. Someone remembers an argument. Vague. Heated. A disagreement over something that wasn't supposed to be shared. The words hang there, incomplete, heavy. Another witness comes forward, reluctantly. A neighbor from years ago. He recalls hearing voices in the hallway late that night. Not shouting. Controlled. Angry in a way that stays low. He didn't call it in. New York trains people not to. He remembers a phrase now, though he's not sure why it stuck. A threat disguised as advice. Something about keeping quiet. Something about consequences. Memory is unreliable, but patterns aren't. And this fits. The suspect's name surfaces again in another file. Unrelated at first glance. A dispute. A restraining order that never stuck. A complaint withdrawn without explanation. Each piece alone is nothing. Together, they form a shape. Investigators trace that shape backward, into the years before the disappearance, and forward, into the years after. They see escalation. Control. A habit of being close to chaos without ever being touched by it. They bring him in a third time. This time, they don't ask about the night. They ask about everything else. His past. His finances. His movements after 2001. He grows defensive. Accuses them of harassment. Demands a lawyer. The interview ends. The room exhales. This is not a confession. This is resistance. And resistance confirms direction. Outside the precinct, the story leaks. Not fully. Not cleanly. Just enough. A reporter hears the phrase cold case. Another hears traffic stop. The community hears arrest pending. The family hears nothing official, but they feel the shift. Calls start coming again. Cameras return. The missing man's face, younger now than it's ever been, reappears on screens across the city. Pressure builds. Prosecutors reconsider. They don't need a body, they decide. They need a narrative that survives cross-examination. They need motive, opportunity, and a chain strong enough to pull the past into court. Detectives work through nights, fueled by stale coffee and older guilt. This case has waited long enough. A break comes from an unexpected place. A former associate of the suspect, recently arrested on an unrelated charge. He's tired. He's scared. He wants leverage. He mentions a conversation from years ago, half remembered, soaked in bravado and bitterness. A joke made too seriously. A claim about making problems disappear. At the time, it sounded like talk. Now it sounds like a map. The associate doesn't know details. He doesn't know locations. But he knows tone. And tone matters. He agrees to testify conditionally. His statement is shaky but sincere. Prosecutors see possibility. They move. An arrest is planned. Quietly. No spectacle. The suspect is picked up on a gray morning that feels ordinary. He doesn't resist. He doesn't smile. He looks tired, like someone who has been waiting. The charge is filed. Second-degree murder. The city flinches. Still, the question remains. Where is the body? Searches begin. Focused. Targeted. Old properties. Renovated buildings. A stretch of river long dismissed. Dogs are brought in. Technology fills gaps that time created. Something is found. Not enough to be definitive. Enough to argue. Enough to hope. The family is told everything prosecutors can legally say. They sit in silence, absorbing words they've rehearsed for decades. Justice feels close and impossibly far at the same time. They prepare for court. They prepare for disappointment. They prepare to hear their loved one's name spoken in past tense, officially, for the first time. As the case moves toward trial, the city leans in. Commentators argue. Skeptics doubt. Supporters demand closure. The cold case has cracked open, but what spills out isn't clarity. It's conflict. And everyone knows the hardest part is still ahead. Because in a courtroom, memory is a weapon. And the past doesn't surrender easily. The city doesn't sleep while it waits for justice, but it does hold its breath. Court dates appear on calendars. Names re-enter public space like echoes pulled from deep water. The suspect is no longer just a man pulled over for a broken taillight. He is a defendant now. A figure framed by charges that stretch back more than 2 decades. Cameras catch him walking into the courthouse, head down, shoulders stiff, surrounded by officers who know the weight of history presses harder than their hands ever could. Inside, the case is stripped of emotion and rebuilt as sequence. Prosecutors lay out timelines with clinical precision. They don't tell a story yet. They assemble a machine. Dates click into place. Phone pings align with subway schedules. Witness statements, once dismissed as noise, are tuned into signal. The 37 missing minutes become the spine of everything. 37 minutes where the missing man and the defendant occupied the same invisible space. 37 minutes that refuse to explain themselves. The defense listens without reacting. That's their first move. No objections. No outbursts. Calm. Their strategy is obvious and dangerous. They don't need to prove innocence. They need to prove doubt. And doubt thrives in old cases. Memories fade. Records rot. Motives blur. They intend to turn time itself into a witness for the defense. The prosecution knows this. They push forward anyway. They call the neighbor. The hallway witness. His voice shakes, not from fear, but from the strain of remembering something the city taught him to forget. He speaks of voices in the corridor, controlled and tense, of a phrase that felt wrong even then. The defense attacks gently. How sure are you? How clear was the lighting? How many years has it been? Each question peels certainty away like old paint. The witness leaves the stand smaller than he arrived. Next comes the associate, the one who talked. He testifies under a deal that everyone can see and no one can ignore. He admits his own crimes. He admits his motivations. He admits that memory is imperfect. But he insists on tone, on the way the defendant spoke about erasing problems, about how disappearance was framed as efficiency, not violence. The courtroom shifts. Jurors lean forward. This is the first moment that feels real. The defense strikes hard here. They paint the associate as desperate, willing to say anything for leniency. They suggest he borrowed the defendant's voice and put words in it. They suggest bravado mistaken for confession. The associate holds. Barely. It's enough to survive cross-examination, not enough to dominate it. Then come the records. Old phone logs projected onto screens like forensic ghosts. Towers. Signals. Pings. The prosecution explains how technology worked in 2001, carefully, patiently, anticipating confusion. They show overlap, proximity, opportunity. The defense counters with uncertainty. Coverage areas were broad. Signals bounced. Presence does not equal action. The jury watches two versions of the same data fight for meaning. The defendant finally speaks, through his lawyer. He maintains distance. He barely knew the missing man. They crossed paths. Nothing more. The calls were meaningless. Coincidences stacked until they look intentional. He says the investigation is chasing patterns because it lacks proof. He looks at the jury when he says it, inviting them to feel reasonable, inviting them to doubt. Outside the courtroom, the family waits. Every day is an exercise in restraint. They hear fragments through reporters. They hear their loved one's name reduced to evidence. They learn to read faces when attorneys walk past. Hope becomes procedural. It arrives in motions granted and objections sustained. It leaves in recesses and delays. The trial drags. Weeks stretch thin. Jurors are reminded not to discuss the case, but the case follows them anyway. It rides the subway with them. It sits beside them at dinner. It asks a question no one wants to answer. Can you condemn a man without a body? Can you trust a story built from absence? The prosecution senses the fragility and changes rhythm. They call an expert, not to speak about death, but about behavior. Patterns of control. Escalation. The defendant's history, once fragmented, is shown as a sequence. Disputes. Withdrawn complaints. Near misses. Not crimes, but warnings. The expert doesn't accuse. He contextualizes. He gives the jury a lens. The defense objects. Character assassination, they argue. The judge allows it narrowly. The jury listens, weighing relevance against prejudice. The line is thin. Everyone knows it. A quiet moment follows. No witnesses. Just silence. Then the prosecution introduces the physical find. Carefully. Respectfully. Fragments recovered from a site long overlooked. They do not claim certainty. They claim possibility. They show how the location connects to the defendant. How access was plausible. How timing aligns. The defense pounces. Inconclusive. Contaminated. Too little, too late. The word speculative is repeated until it loses meaning. Closing arguments approach like weather. Inevitable. Charged. The prosecution speaks first. They don't shout. They don't dramatize. They walk the jury back through the years, through the gaps, through the choices that led here. They argue that absence can be evidence when it's deliberate. That disappearance is not neutrality. That someone acted, and that someone is sitting right there. The defense responds with calm precision. They warn against emotion, against filling holes with imagination. They remind the jury that the burden is heavy for a reason. They ask them to protect the principle, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. The judge instructs. The jury retires. The room empties slowly, like air leaking from a sealed space. Outside, microphones wait. Inside, the family waits. The defendant waits. Time stretches again, familiar and cruel. Deliberations last days. Notes are sent. Clarifications requested. The jury asks to review the phone records. They ask to hear the associate's testimony again. They ask about the physical fragments. Each request sends a ripple through the courthouse. Each answer tightens the knot. When the verdict finally comes, the room fills. People stand. The clerk reads. The words land heavily, one by one. Guilty. Not on everything. Enough. Enough to end the wait. Enough to name the loss. The defendant doesn't react. He stares forward, as if the past has finally caught up and there's nothing left to do but let it pass through him. The family collapses into each other, relief and grief indistinguishable. The city exhales, unsure whether to celebrate or mourn. But even with a conviction, the case doesn't close cleanly. There is still no body. No final image. No certainty of where the missing man rests. The cold case is cracked, but it is not healed. It leaves behind a scar shaped like a question. And that question lingers long after the courtroom empties, long after the cameras turn away, lingering in the places where certainty never quite reaches. The verdict echoes, but it doesn't settle. It ripples outward, touching places the courtroom never sees. Apartments where lights stay on too late. Offices where detectives sit quietly, staring at desks that no longer need the case file but still feel its weight. A conviction is supposed to be an ending. This one behaves like a pause. The city resumes its rhythm, yet something underneath stays misaligned, as if justice arrived late and left early at the same time. Sentencing looms. Dates are set. Arguments prepared. The defendant's face appears again, this time stripped of ambiguity. Guilty carries gravity. It changes posture. It changes tone. But it does not change the past. And the past refuses to stop talking. Prosecutors know the sentence must speak for years of silence. They compile impact statements. They revisit evidence not to prove guilt, but to measure harm. Every choice made in those missing 37 minutes is recalculated, not as theory, but as consequence. They argue intent. They argue finality. They argue that disappearance is a violence that never ends because it denies closure every single day. The defense counters with restraint. They acknowledge the verdict without embracing it. They argue uncertainty. They argue that without a body, punishment must be cautious. They talk about doubt lingering like fog. They talk about the danger of overreach. Their words are polished, careful, almost soothing. They ask the court to temper emotion with principle. The judge listens. Judges always do. But listening does not mean hesitating. When the sentence is delivered, it lands with the thud of something heavy finally put down. Decades. Not symbolic. Not lenient. Enough to ensure the defendant will not walk freely again. Enough to mark the crime as permanent. The family listens too. They hear numbers. Years. Conditions. They try to translate them into meaning. No sentence brings back what was taken. But the weight of it matters. It tells them the system believes them. That belief counts for something, even if it doesn't heal. Outside, the headlines are blunt. Cold case cracked. Justice after decades. Routine traffic stop leads to arrest. The story travels fast, trimmed into something clean and consumable. But the truth remains jagged. It always does. Investigators don't stop working. Conviction doesn't end curiosity. It sharpens it. They return to the question that never left the room. Where is he? The missing man's absence still occupies space. It fills rooms. It sits in chairs. It waits in hallways. And until it's answered, the case feels unfinished. Search efforts resume, quietly. Without press. Without expectation. Old sites are re-examined with new technology. Ground-penetrating tools hum across places that have changed names and owners. Each signal raises hope, then lowers it again. The city has layered itself over the truth, concrete poured on top of memory. A new tip comes in. Anonymous. Specific. Too specific to ignore. It points to a location mentioned once in trial, but never fully explored. A place the defendant had access to briefly, legally, forgettably. Investigators move fast this time. Warrants secured. Teams deployed. The ground is broken carefully, respectfully, as if the earth itself might object. They find nothing conclusive. Again, the pattern repeats. Absence asserts itself like a law of physics. The missing man remains missing, stubbornly beyond reach. Detectives feel the familiar frustration rise, sharper now because the end feels so close. They remind themselves that answers are not owed. They are earned. And sometimes they are simply lost. The family is told what they need to know. They nod. They thank people they barely recognize anymore. They have learned how to manage disappointment. It sits with them like an old injury, flaring unexpectedly, never fully healing. Years pass again, but differently now. This time, there is a name attached to the loss. A verdict. A sentence. The cold case is no longer frozen in uncertainty. It's fixed in history. But history is not closure. It's record. The community adapts. The story becomes a reference point. A warning. A reminder that ordinary nights can fracture without sound. People mention it in passing, usually when discussing crime statistics or advancements in technology. Few remember the details. Fewer still remember the waiting. Inside prison walls, the defendant adjusts to time measured in counts and routines. Appeals are filed. Motions argued. None succeed. The conviction holds. The years stretch forward, relentless and slow. He maintains his story. He did not kill. He did not know. He did not act. Guilt, he insists, is a construct built from pressure and narrative. His words find little traction. But they exist. And existence matters. Occasionally, investigators receive letters. Not confessions. Not apologies. Observations. Complaints. Requests. The defendant hints at knowledge without offering it. He suggests leverage. He suggests misunderstanding. Each letter is read. Each is weighed. None deliver what everyone wants. The family debates whether to respond. Whether engagement invites manipulation. Whether silence is safer. They choose distance. They've given enough of themselves already. As time moves on, new detectives join the department. They learn the case in training sessions and late-night conversations. It becomes a lesson in patience, in persistence, in the limits of certainty. They study how a routine traffic stop unlocked a door no one was looking at anymore. They study how small actions ripple forward, sometimes for decades. The missing man's name is added to memorials. Not officially, not everywhere, but in places that matter. Online pages. Community lists. Spaces where unresolved stories are kept alive not for spectacle, but for respect. His photo remains, frozen at an age he never got to outgrow. And still, the question persists. It drifts through conversations and quiet moments alike. What really happened in those 37 minutes? The trial answered who. It suggested how. It never fully explained why. Motive remains partially obscured, buried beneath layers of inference and silence. Perhaps it always will be. Late one night, years after sentencing, a former investigator revisits the case alone. Not officially. Not on the clock. He rereads transcripts. He studies maps. He traces routes with his finger, imagining decisions made under pressure, choices that felt small at the time and enormous in consequence. He stops at a line he's read 100 times before. A phrase from a witness. A detail that never fit. He wonders, briefly, if there's still more to know. Then he closes the file. Some cases follow you forever. This one follows the city. The cold case is cracked, they say. And in the strictest sense, it is. But cracks don't mean clean breaks. They let light in, yes. They also let shadows stretch. And somewhere between what was proven and what was lost, the story continues to breathe, quietly, relentlessly, refusing to disappear the way its victim did. After the sentence is handed down and the courtroom empties for the last time, the case does something unexpected. It refuses to rest. The paperwork says closed. The verdict says resolved. But the air around it stays tense, as if the truth is still moving, still rearranging itself in places no one is looking. Cold cases don't always end with answers. Sometimes they end with endurance. The detectives who lived with it the longest feel this most sharply. They return to other investigations, newer disappearances, fresher violence, but this one shadows them. Every missing person report echoes it. Every unanswered phone record looks familiar. The routine traffic stop that cracked the case becomes legend inside the department, retold not with pride, but with caution. A reminder that resolution often comes from the edges, not the center. Training manuals are updated. Databases are refined. Old cases are re-examined with renewed attention to minor contacts, dismissed names, forgotten notes. The lesson is clear and uncomfortable. Proximity matters. Silence matters. The people who hover near a life without fully entering it may be the ones who know how to erase it. Outside law enforcement, the story settles into public memory in fragments. Documentaries summarize it in 45 minutes. Articles compress decades into paragraphs. Headlines freeze the moment of arrest and ignore the years of waiting that came before it. The missing man becomes a symbol rather than a person. His habits, his jokes, his quiet presence fade beneath the weight of the narrative built around his absence. His family resists that flattening. They speak when they can. They correct small errors. They insist on details that don't fit neatly into the crime story, but matter deeply to them. What he liked to eat. How he laughed. How he always called when he said he would. These details feel fragile, endangered by time. Preserving them becomes a new kind of work. Anniversaries pass with new meaning. The date of the disappearance. The date of the arrest. The date of sentencing. Each one carries a different emotional temperature. Grief no longer dominates every moment, but it never leaves. It adapts. It settles into routines. It waits quietly, then surfaces without warning, triggered by something as small as a song or a familiar street corner. The defendant's appeals quietly fail. Each denial is brief, procedural, almost impersonal. The system confirms its decision without revisiting the story. Legally, nothing more needs to be said. Morally, the questions remain loud. Inside prison walls, the defendant ages. His name loses relevance beyond paperwork and scheduled hearings. To the institution, he is another number, another routine. But occasionally, he reminds people he is still part of the story. A comment to a guard. A letter to an advocacy group. A claim that something was misunderstood, that the truth is incomplete. He never provides specifics. He never names a place. His ambiguity feels intentional. Power held back like currency. Investigators debate whether to engage. Some believe pressure could yield information. Others believe silence is the point, that acknowledging him rewards control. In the end, distance wins. They've learned what proximity can cost. The missing man's file is moved to a different shelf. Not active. Not archived beyond reach. Somewhere in between. A space reserved for cases that are resolved but not recovered. The category itself feels like a contradiction. Solved, yet unfinished. Justice without location. Closure without certainty. Occasionally, a new tip surfaces. They always do. Someone remembers something differently. Someone connects a story they heard years ago to a detail they saw on television. Each tip is logged. Each is assessed. Most fade quickly. A few linger just long enough to raise hope before dissolving again. The pattern becomes familiar. Anticipation followed by restraint. The community where the disappearance began has changed almost completely. Buildings renovated. Businesses replaced. Residents rotated out and replaced by people who have never heard the name. Yet the street still holds memory, layered beneath asphalt and signage. Those who live there then still lower their voices when passing through, as if the place itself is listening. The case influences how people talk about safety, not in dramatic terms. In quieter ones, trust becomes conditional. Familiarity is questioned. The idea that danger announces itself is quietly abandoned. People learn that harm can arrive wearing normalcy, that routine is not protection. Years later, a journalist revisits the story with fresh eyes. Not to sensationalize it, but to understand it. He interviews retired detectives, aging witnesses, family members who speak more softly now. He notices what earlier coverage missed. The pauses. The exhaustion. The way everyone describes the same events, but carries them differently. His article avoids definitive language. He leaves space for uncertainty. Readers respond strongly. Not because it reveals something new, but because it acknowledges what remains unresolved. The article brings a brief resurgence of attention. Online discussions flare. Amateur investigators reassemble timelines. Theories circulate. Some are thoughtful, others reckless. The family watches from a distance. They've learned to recognize the difference between curiosity and care. They engage with neither. One retired detective reaches out privately after reading the piece. He shares a thought he's carried for years. Not a theory, a feeling. He describes a moment early in the investigation when a choice was made quickly, reasonably, and perhaps incorrectly. A name dismissed. A lead deprioritized. He wonders what might have changed if time had been different. Regret doesn't accuse. It reflects. The family listens. They don't respond with anger. They respond with understanding. They know investigations are made of humans, not machines. They know perfection was never promised. Acknowledgement matters more than apology. As the decades accumulate, The missing man becomes younger than the world around him. Photos freeze him in a style that no longer exists. He remains 30-something while his peers gray and retire. This imbalance feels unnatural, a visual reminder that time did not treat everyone equally. Memorials continue quietly. Candles lit without announcement. Names spoken without amplification. The family creates rituals that do not depend on discovery. They choose remembrance over resolution. It's a decision born of necessity, not acceptance. The cold case's legacy settles into institutions. It influences how traffic stops are documented, how minor contacts are recorded, how databases talk to each other. Its impact is subtle but persistent. The city learns from its own shadow. And yet, on certain nights, the story sharpens again. A map revisited. A theory reconsidered. A location imagined differently. Somewhere, someone still believes the final piece exists, waiting to be recognized. Perhaps in a memory not yet shared. Perhaps in a place overlooked not because it was hidden, but because it was ordinary. That belief is both hope and burden. It keeps the case alive, quietly, long after official interest fades. It ensures the missing man is not reduced entirely to absence. That his story still has weight, still exerts pressure on the present. The cold case was cracked, they say. And in the language of law, that is true. But in the language of loss, cracking is only the beginning. What matters is what seeps through the fracture. Memory, doubt, persistence, and the refusal to let a life be erased completely, even when the city tries to move on. Time does not loosen its grip on the case. It tightens it, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until the unanswered questions feel heavier than the answers that were given. With the defendant locked away and the headlines long archived, the story enters a quieter phase. This is where cold cases truly live. Not in courtrooms or news cycles, but in the spaces between certainty and doubt, where facts coexist with what might have been. Inside police departments, the case becomes a reference point rather than an assignment. New detectives hear about it in hushed tones, usually late at night, usually after a shift that ended badly. It's described as a win, technically. A success story pulled from the jaws of time. But it's also described as incomplete. A solved disappearance without a destination. A resolution that left a shadow behind. One investigator, newer to the force, starts reading everything he can find. Not because he's assigned to it, but because something about the gaps bothers him. He studies the 37 minutes again, tracing them not as a straight line but as a branching tree. Every possible decision point. Every turn that could have gone another way. He notices how often convenience guided early assumptions. How reasonable shortcuts hardened into permanent conclusions. He doesn't accuse anyone. He doesn't reopen anything. He just observes. And observation, in cases like this, can be dangerous. It invites questions. He notices that one location, mentioned briefly in passing during the trial, never received sustained attention. Not because it was hidden, but because it was mundane. A place so ordinary it dissolved into the background of a city built on sameness. At the time, there was no reason to linger there. Now, with distance, it feels unfinished. He shares the thought with a supervisor. The response is measured. The case is closed. Resources are limited. But curiosity is not prohibited. If he wants to look, he can. Quietly. On his own time. So he does. He walks the route one evening, years after the fact, trying to feel the geography rather than analyze it. Streetlights hum. Trains pass. The city breathes around him, indifferent. He imagines two men moving through this space under very different assumptions. One thinking about getting home. The other thinking about control. He stops where the map suggests something could have happened, not because evidence demands it, but because instinct does. There is nothing there. No marker. No sign. Just pavement and noise. And yet, the place feels heavy. He notes it mentally and moves on, knowing feeling is not proof. Meanwhile, the family continues its careful distance from speculation. They have seen what theories can do. How they can fracture memory and turn a person into a puzzle rather than a presence. Still, even they wonder sometimes. In private. Late at night. They revisit choices, conversations, moments that now feel weighted with significance they didn't carry at the time. One family member begins writing. Not publicly, just for themselves. They document the years between disappearance and arrest, then the years after conviction. The writing isn't chronological. It's emotional. It circles themes. Waiting. Hope. Betrayal by time. The act of writing becomes a way to stabilize something that never resolved. That writing eventually becomes a letter. Not to the defendant. Not to law enforcement. To the missing man. It's filled with mundane updates and unanswerable questions. It's never sent. It doesn't need to be. Its purpose is internal. To affirm that connection survived even when certainty did not. Elsewhere, the journalist who revisited the case continues digging, long after public interest wanes again. He follows leads no one asked him to follow. He reads zoning records, construction permits, old business licenses. He looks for patterns of access rather than motive. His work is methodical, slow, and largely invisible. He uncovers something small. Not evidence. Context. A renovation that occurred shortly after the disappearance. A contractor with ties to someone tangentially connected to the defendant. It's thin. Almost nothing. He brings it to an editor who shakes their head. Not enough. Too speculative. The journalist understands. He files it away. Speculation, after all, is the enemy of truth in unresolved cases. It fills space that facts can't reach, but it rarely leads anywhere solid. The journalist chooses restraint, even as curiosity nags. Inside the prison system, the defendant continues to exist in a state of half-relevance. Occasionally, a new inmate recognizes his name, asks questions, tries to trade stories. He deflects. He maintains control by offering nothing concrete. Silence becomes his final defense and perhaps his last advantage. Once, during a routine evaluation, he mentions a place without naming it. A vague reference. A conditional statement. If people had looked somewhere else, things might be different. The evaluator notes it but cannot act on it. Ambiguity without detail is not actionable. The statement joins a long list of near confessions that lead nowhere. Law enforcement debates whether this is manipulation or regret leaking through cracks. There's no consensus. And without clarity, there is no move to make. Years layer over years. Technology advances again. Tools that didn't exist during the original investigation, or even during the trial, become standard. Some detectives quietly wonder whether these tools could have changed everything. Others remind them that technology amplifies data, but it cannot invent it. If the trail is gone, it's gone. The cold case occupies a strange space in the city's collective mind. It is cited as proof that persistence works. It is also cited as proof that certainty is fragile. Both are true. Neither is comforting. At a community forum on public safety, someone mentions the case during a discussion about missing persons. Not by name, just as an example. A reminder that disappearances don't always announce themselves. That waiting for obvious danger can mean waiting too long. The audience nods. The lesson lands quietly. Later that night, one attendee looks up the story, reads through old articles, notices the contradictions, the unanswered questions. They fall into a familiar rabbit hole, piecing together fragments late into the night. For them, the case is new, fresh, alive. For those who lived it, it never stopped being. This pattern repeats. New eyes, old facts, renewed fascination, and always, eventually, the same stopping point. No body, no final certainty. The story reaches its edge and stalls. And yet, the case continues to exert pressure. It influences how detectives approach new disappearances, how journalists frame unresolved stories, how families of the missing measure hope. Its impact is diffuse but persistent, like a low-frequency hum beneath the city's constant noise. The investigator who walked the route returns to his regular duties. He doesn't escalate his thoughts. He doesn't write a report. He files the feeling away, knowing that not everything needs action to matter. Some things simply need to be remembered. On the anniversary of the disappearance, the family gathers quietly. No cameras. No statements. They share stories that have nothing to do with crime. They talk about vacations that never happened. Jokes that still land. Habits that persist in unexpected ways. The missing man is present there, not as a victim, but as a person. As night falls, the city moves on, unaware of the significance of the date. Cars pass. Lights change. Somewhere, a routine traffic stop happens again, unnoticed, unremarkable, potentially pivotal. The thought lingers unspoken. That history turns not on dramatic moments, but on ordinary ones that intersect in unexpected ways. The cold case remains cracked open, its edges sharp, its center elusive. It waits, patiently, for whatever comes next. Whether that is discovery or simply continued remembrance. In unresolved stories, persistence is its own form of truth. There comes a point in every unresolved story where facts stop multiplying and interpretations begin to fight for space. This case has reached that point. With the verdict cemented and the years stretching outward, what remains is not evidence, but meaning. And meaning, in the absence of certainty, becomes contested ground. Inside law enforcement circles, the debate never fully settles. Some believe the case represents justice delayed, but ultimately delivered. Others believe it stands as a warning about the limits of narrative-driven prosecution. Both camps speak carefully, aware that public confidence is a fragile thing. But privately, the conversations are sharper. They return again and again to the same question: what does justice look like when the truth can't be physically recovered? The absence of a body changes everything. It turns assumptions into pillars and probability into currency. It forces institutions built on proof to lean on inference. For some, that feels like evolution. For others, erosion. Younger detectives, trained in a post-digital world, wrestle with the idea that disappearance itself can be treated as evidence. They study the case in seminars, dissecting it not for answers, but for precedent. They ask whether certainty is a requirement or a luxury. Whether the law should demand completeness or accept coherence. There are no clean answers. Only trade-offs. Defense attorneys cite the case often. Not by name, but by structure. They argue that once courts accept conviction without recovery, the threshold shifts permanently. That juries begin to fill gaps emotionally rather than logically. Prosecutors counter that perpetrators should not be rewarded for efficiency. That erasing a body cannot erase accountability. The argument becomes philosophical, but its consequences are real. Academics weigh in. Papers are written. Panels convened. The case becomes shorthand for a larger question about modern justice. Can systems designed for visible crimes adapt to invisible ones? Can silence be interpreted without being abused? Each answer carries risk. The family watches these debates from afar. They feel strangely detached from a conversation built around a life they loved. Their loss has become an example, a footnote, a talking point. They do not resent this, but it reminds them how far the story has traveled from its origin. From one ordinary man who didn't come home. Sometimes, they imagine an alternative ending. Not one where the crime didn't happen, but one where it ended differently. A discovery. A place. A final certainty that would anchor everything else. They imagine visiting it. Standing there. Knowing. The imagining hurts, but it also clarifies what's missing. Not revenge. Not punishment. Orientation. In quiet moments, they ask themselves whether the conviction is enough. The answer changes depending on the day. Justice, they've learned, is not a destination. It's a condition that fluctuates. Public fascination with the case evolves too. It shifts from shock to analysis. Online forums dissect jury decisions. Armchair investigators redraw maps and timelines, often missing context, but brimming with confidence. Some argue the defendant was framed by coincidence. Others insist the prosecution held back stronger evidence that was never revealed. Each theory claims clarity. None deliver it. Occasionally, someone claims to know more. A post. A message. A comment buried deep in a thread. They hint at secrets. At second suspects. At conspiracies. Most are noise. A few feel unsettling. They mention details not widely publicized. Investigators take note when necessary, but experience has taught them caution. Attention seekers often mimic insight convincingly. The cold case occupies a moral gray zone that refuses to resolve. It forces society to confront uncomfortable possibilities. That justice can be partial. That truth can be incomplete. That closure is not guaranteed, even when courts speak definitively. One retired judge reflects on the case in an interview years later. He speaks carefully, aware of the weight of his words. He says the law is not a mirror of reality. It's a framework for managing it. Verdicts are conclusions, not revelations. They don't explain the universe. They organize it enough to function. His words resonate not because they satisfy, but because they admit limitation. Meanwhile, the missing man's absence continues to shape small, intimate decisions. A sibling chooses not to move far from home, anchored by memory. A parent avoids certain streets, unconsciously rerouting around ghosts. These choices are invisible to the public, but constant to those living them. The investigator who once walked the route again revisits the case, this time intellectually rather than physically. He reads about similar disappearances, similar prosecutions. Patterns emerge across jurisdictions. Disappearances clustered around trust, around familiarity, around moments that felt safe. He realizes the case is not unique. It is representative. That realization carries weight. It reframes the story from anomaly to warning. Not a freak occurrence, but a type. A category of crime that thrives in blind spots and assumptions. The lesson is unsettling. It suggests prevention requires paranoia, or at least vigilance. It suggests normalcy is not neutral. The defendant remains largely silent. But silence itself becomes interpretive. Some see it as stubborn denial. Others see it as containment. A refusal to surrender the final piece of power. Psychologists debate it. Control-oriented personalities often value information as leverage. Withholding can be more satisfying than confessing. There is speculation that the defendant will speak eventually. On a deathbed. In exchange for something. Redemption. Attention. Reduced isolation. The family rejects this speculation. They refuse to hinge their peace on a possibility controlled by someone else. Waiting once was forced upon them. They will not volunteer for it again. As years pass, new cases emerge that echo this one. A missing person. A suspect. No body. Prosecutors weigh decisions carefully, aware of precedent. This case becomes part of that calculus, influencing choices in rooms it will never enter. Its impact is subtle but real. At a conference on unresolved crimes, a speaker references the case obliquely. He talks about the cost of ambiguity, about how communities absorb unresolved harm like a slow leak. He argues that transparency about uncertainty matters as much as resolution. The audience listens, recognizing the truth in discomfort. The cold case has become more than a file. It's a lens through which justice is questioned, memory is preserved, and assumptions are challenged. It has reshaped how people think about disappearance, not as absence, but as an active condition imposed by someone else. Late one evening, a member of the family stands at a window overlooking the city. Lights stretch endlessly, each one representing a life moving forward. They think about how many stories intersect without ever touching. How many ordinary moments quietly change trajectories. They wonder how close the truth might have passed them without revealing itself. They do not expect answers anymore. But they still expect honesty. From institutions. From narratives. From history itself. They accept that some questions remain open not because no one asked them, but because the world did not provide the means to answer. The cold case continues to exist in this space. Not solved. Not unsolved. Something in between. A fracture that never sealed, forcing those who look at it to confront the limits of certainty and the endurance of loss. And as long as the city breathes around it, as long as people continue to disappear without explanation, the story will remain relevant. Not because it shocks, but because it refuses to end. Night fell over the town like a thick, heavy curtain. The streets were deserted, the pale yellow lights casting a dim glow on the rain-soaked sidewalks, and in the police station, The atmosphere was as thick as the silence itself. After years of deadlock, the case was reopened. But this time, not with the innocent hope of the beginning, but with a chilling suspicion, peeling back layer after layer of what had been deliberately overlooked. Old documents lay on the table. Interrogation transcripts, crime scene diagrams, faded photographs. The new investigator, unburdened by the emotions of the past, began asking very different questions. Not who did it, but what did we miss? A seemingly insignificant detail suddenly emerged. The testimony of a secondary witness, one who had been on the fringes of the story, appearing only a few lines in the file. When compared chronologically, that testimony didn't quite match the key events. Previously, that discrepancy was attributed to poor memory. Now, it became a question mark. Investigators sought out the witness. Time had grayed her hair, her voice was more shaky, but her eyes were different. They held something unspoken. The conversation began cautiously. No one wanted to stir up old memories. But then, amidst the silences, a sentence escaped. I saw someone else. Not the suspected person. Not a familiar face in town. A stranger, appearing and disappearing, at precisely the time when it was previously believed no one could be there. That detail was like a stone thrown into a calm lake, creating ripples that spread outward. Alongside the new testimony, modern forensic technology began to speak. The old sample, previously deemed insufficient, was re-examined using advanced methods. The results didn't offer immediate answers, but they ruled out old assumptions. Something didn't fit. The pressure mounted. Those who had once been certain of the conclusion now began to evade it. Some remained silent. Others reacted vehemently. The truth, when shaken, often frightens people more than lies. In a small room, fluorescent lights shone down on a metal table. Another interrogation took place. No more familiar questions. This time, the investigator focused on minute details, seemingly unrelated. A late phone call, a short trip no one remembered, a gap in the schedule. These gaps, when pieced together, formed a suspicious shape. And then, an old mistake was acknowledged not on paper, but in their eyes. A former investigator, now retired, sighed as he looked at the file. We rushed, he said. We wanted to close the case. That statement resonated like a verdict against the entire system. Haste may bring a sense of order, but it also buries the truth. News of the new findings began to spread. The victims' families, those who had lived with the pain for years, received the information with mixed emotions. A glimmer of hope, but also a deep fear. Because if everything before was wrong, then what did those years mean? At the end of this part, the case remains unsolved. But a door has opened. The previously overlooked pieces are now put back in place, though the picture remains incomplete. The truth, like the darkness of night, doesn't disappear just because people don't want to see it. And when the light begins to shine, it forces everyone to confront it. The name does not arrive with drama at first. It slips into the case quietly, almost by accident, buried inside a routine database update, a line of text that looks no different from thousands of others scrolling past tired eyes on a flickering screen. No flashing lights. No sudden music. Just a name, a date of birth, an old address in Queens, and a fingerprint that shouldn't match anything at all. Except it does. And the moment the match registers, the room seems to change temperature. Conversations slow. Chairs stop creaking. Someone rereads the line once, then again, just to be sure it isn't a glitch, because for years this case has trained everyone involved to expect disappointment, to expect dead ends, to expect that every apparent breakthrough will dissolve under scrutiny. But this one holds. The fingerprint lifted from an object at the original scene in 2001, dismissed back then as partial, unreliable, unusable, has just aligned itself perfectly with a print taken during a routine traffic stop nearly 2 decades later. No sirens announce the discovery. No headlines yet. Just the quiet realization that a ghost has stepped out of the fog and left a shadow. The traffic stop itself was unremarkable, the kind of encounter that happens thousands of times a day across the city. A broken taillight. A driver who hesitated too long before pulling over. A patrol car idling under sodium streetlights that washed the asphalt in dull orange. The officer followed procedure, asked the questions, ran the information, scanned the fingerprints as policy required. At the time, there was no reason to think this would be anything more than paperwork and a warning. The driver didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't look nervous enough to raise suspicion. Just another face in the endless flow of New York nights. But databases have long memories, and unlike people, they do not forget. When the system flagged the match, it didn't announce itself with certainty. It offered a suggestion, a probability, a quiet nudge that said, "Look closer." Investigators do look closer. Carefully. Reluctantly. They have been burned before by coincidences that seemed meaningful until they weren't. They pull the original evidence logs from storage, the kind of boxes that smell like dust and time, labeled with dates that feel unreal now. 2001, a different city, a different world. They compare the prints manually, ridge by ridge, line by line, refusing to trust automation alone. The alignment is undeniable. The odds of a false match shrink with every confirmation. The name on the screen begins to feel heavier, like it's pressing down on the desk itself. This isn't closure yet, but it is something the case has not had in years: direction. The name triggers a chain reaction. Old records are reopened. Addresses are mapped. Employment histories traced. The man attached to the fingerprint has lived quietly, almost invisibly, drifting between short-term jobs, changing apartments just often enough to avoid forming roots. No major criminal history. A few minor offenses. Nothing that would have drawn attention. In 2001, he would have been close enough to the victim's orbit to matter, close enough to be seen, close enough to be overlooked. That realization lands hard. The most unsettling suspects are often the ones who blend in perfectly, who never announce themselves as threats, who leave behind only the faintest impressions. As detectives reconstruct the timeline, small details once dismissed as irrelevant start to glow with new significance. A witness who mentioned seeing someone near the location but couldn't describe them clearly. A report of a vehicle that didn't quite match anything on file. A note scribbled in the margin of an interview transcript, questioning whether a certain lead had been followed far enough. Back then, the case was crowded with noise, tips pouring in, pressure from the media, a community demanding answers. In that chaos, subtlety was easy to miss. Now, with the benefit of distance and the clarity of hindsight, the pieces begin to rearrange themselves into a pattern that feels disturbingly coherent. Still, uncertainty lingers. A fingerprint places someone at a location, not inside a motive, not inside a moment. Investigators know how fragile public trust can be, especially in cases that have already disappointed so many. They proceed slowly, methodically, aware that every step will be scrutinized. Surveillance is authorized. Movements are logged. Conversations are noted. The man goes about his life unaware that the past has finally found him, that a night long buried under years of routine is rising to the surface. There is no dramatic confrontation yet, no knock on the door. Just observation. Waiting. Building a foundation strong enough to hold the weight of what may come next. The victim's family, meanwhile, remains suspended in a state that has become familiar over the years, cautious hope wrapped in protective skepticism. They have heard promises before. They have felt the rise and fall of expectation too many times to trust easily. When they are informed that new developments have emerged, the words land softly, carefully chosen to avoid reopening wounds too quickly. There is no celebration, just a quiet intake of breath. A question left unspoken: will this finally lead somewhere, or will it fade like everything else? The community feels it too, even before the details become public. Cold cases carry a unique kind of weight. They are not just unsolved crimes, they are open loops in collective memory, reminders that time does not guarantee answers. In neighborhoods where stories are passed down like local folklore, the case has become part of the background noise, a cautionary tale whispered and then set aside. Now, rumors begin to circulate again. Old conversations resurface. People wonder aloud whether the city might finally exhale after all these years. Inside the investigation, tension builds. The name is cross-checked against every known angle of the case. Financial records, phone logs, social connections. There are coincidences that feel too precise to ignore, overlaps that tighten the narrative thread. Yet investigators remain disciplined. They know how dangerous it is to fall in love with a theory. Every assumption is challenged. Every conclusion is tested. The goal is not just to point a finger, but to ensure that if this story finally reaches an ending, it will withstand the harshest light. Late nights stretch into early mornings as the team works through boxes of evidence that once seemed destined to gather dust forever. The past feels close now, uncomfortably close, as if 2001 is no longer a distant chapter, but a room they can step back into at will. Photographs are studied again. Audio recordings replayed. The same questions asked with sharper focus. What was missed? Who was trusted too easily? And how many answers were waiting quietly for the right moment to surface? By the time the sun rises over the city, casting pale light between the buildings, the case no longer feels cold. It feels awake. Not solved, not yet, but alive in a way it hasn't been for years. The name sits at the center of everything, a single point around which the entire investigation now turns. There is a sense, unspoken but shared, that whatever comes next will change the story forever, either by delivering the truth that has been withheld for so long, or by reminding everyone how fragile certainty can be. As Part 9 closes, there is no resolution to offer, no final verdict to declare. Only the steady, relentless pull of a mystery tightening its grip. The past has reached forward and touched the present, leaving a mark that cannot be ignored. In a city that never truly sleeps, one cold case has finally opened its eyes, and the question that hangs in the air is no longer whether answers exist, but whether anyone is ready for what those answers might reveal. The knock on the door comes at dawn, not because dawn is dramatic, but because it is practical, because routines are predictable at that hour, because surprise is a tool investigators have learned to wield carefully. The city is barely awake when unmarked cars line the curb, engines ticking softly, officers stepping out without urgency, without raised voices, without spectacle. This is not an arrest yet. This is contact. A conversation long delayed. Inside the apartment, the man attached to the fingerprint moves through his morning without knowing that every step he takes has already been measured, every habit noted, every exit mapped. When the door opens, the past stands there calmly, holding a badge. He looks confused, not alarmed. That alone is unsettling. There is no visible panic, no sudden attempt to close the door, no instinctive protest of innocence. Just a pause, a narrowing of the eyes, the silent calculation of someone trying to understand how a routine life has suddenly intersected with something far larger. The detectives introduce themselves, explain that they have questions about an incident from years ago, something that happened in 2001. The year hangs in the air like a foreign language. For a moment, it seems possible that the man truly doesn't remember, or that he has spent so long not remembering that the memory no longer feels real. Inside the interview room hours later, the atmosphere is controlled, almost sterile. No harsh lights. No shouting. Just a table, 2 chairs, a recorder blinking red. The questions begin broadly, circling slowly, allowing the man space to speak, to build his own narrative. Where he lived back then. Where he worked. Who he knew. His answers are smooth, rehearsed in the way that only long practice can produce. He does not contradict himself easily. He does not volunteer more than necessary. He presents himself as someone who has learned how to survive by keeping his head down, by being forgettable. And for years, it worked. Then the fingerprint enters the conversation. Not as an accusation, not as a weapon, but as a fact. A piece of information placed gently on the table. The effect is immediate, though subtle. His posture changes. A shoulder tightens. His eyes flick downward for just a second too long. It is the kind of reaction that would mean nothing on its own, but everything in context. He asks questions now. Careful ones. How reliable is the match? How old is the evidence? Why are they coming to him after all this time? The detectives answer without overreaching. They do not need a confession yet. They need cracks. Outside the room, the team listens, watches, takes notes. Every word is weighed, every hesitation marked. This is the point where cases often either collapse or accelerate. Push too hard, and the suspect shuts down. Move too slowly, and the moment passes. The balance is delicate. The detectives know they are standing on years of grief, expectation, and public pressure. They also know that certainty, real certainty, takes patience. As the interview stretches on, fragments of the past begin to surface, not as admissions, but as slips. A location remembered too clearly. A time frame corrected too quickly. A denial that anticipates a question before it's asked. None of it is enough on its own. Together, it forms a silhouette, an outline that feels uncomfortably familiar to those who have studied the case for so long. This is not the image of a stranger. It is the shape of someone who has been there. Meanwhile, prosecutors are looped in quietly, brought up to speed on developments that could change the trajectory of the case entirely. They review the evidence with a colder eye, less interested in narrative and more focused on what can survive a courtroom. A fingerprint is powerful, but it is not invincible. They ask about chain of custody, about contamination, about why this evidence wasn't usable before. Every question is a reminder that solving a case is not the same as proving it. The margin for error is thin, especially when the stakes are this high. The victim's family is informed that a person of interest has been identified and questioned. The words are chosen carefully, deliberately stripped of promises. There is a pause on the line after the news is delivered, a silence heavy with everything that has come before. Hope is present, but it is cautious, armored. They have lived too long with unanswered questions to let themselves believe fully. Still, something shifts. The case is no longer frozen in time. It is moving, inch by inch, toward something that resembles resolution. As word begins to leak, the media wakes up. Reporters dig through archives, pull out old headlines, revisit footage from 2001 that feels grainy and unreal now. The phrase cold case re-enters the public conversation with force, paired with words like breakthrough and unexpected lead. The city watches with a mix of fascination and restraint. New York has seen too many stories like this to celebrate early. The memory of cases that seemed solved and then unraveled is still fresh. Back inside the investigation, pressure builds. Surveillance continues. Search warrants are drafted, reviewed, refined. Every move is deliberate. The goal is no longer just to connect the suspect to the scene, but to reconstruct the story in a way that leaves no room for doubt. Detectives return to locations tied to the man's past, places that haven't changed much despite the passing years. Standing there now, they try to imagine how it looked then, how it felt, how someone could commit an act that would ripple outward for decades, and then step back into ordinary life. The suspect is released after the interview, not because the trail has gone cold again, but because the system demands more. As he walks out, there is no visible relief, only a guarded neutrality. He knows now that he is seen. That anonymity, once his greatest shield, has cracked. From this point forward, every day will carry the weight of attention, of possibility. The past is no longer silent. Late at night, alone in offices lit by desk lamps and computer screens, investigators review the interview again, listening not just to what was said, but to how it was said. They argue over interpretations, challenge each other's assumptions, refuse to let excitement cloud judgment. This is the discipline that cold cases demand. The understanding that truth often emerges not in dramatic confessions, but in the accumulation of small, stubborn facts that refuse to disappear. By the end of Part 10, nothing has been officially declared. No charges filed. No headlines announcing justice served. But the direction is clear. The case has crossed a threshold from possibility into pursuit. The question is no longer whether someone can be linked to the crime, but whether the link can be made unbreakable. In a story defined by waiting, the waiting now feels different, charged, tense, heavy with consequence. The city holds its breath, aware that after years of silence, the cold case is finally beginning to speak. The arrest comes without fanfare, without flashing headlines in the moment it happens, because by the time the warrant is signed, Everyone involved understands the gravity of silence. This is the kind of moment that can fracture if handled carelessly. Early morning again, a repetition that feels intentional now. Officers returning to the same quiet block, the same building, the same door. The city outside moves on, unaware that history is about to fold in on itself. When the cuffs click shut, the sound is small, almost anticlimactic, yet it carries the weight of 22 years. A routine traffic stop once nudged open a door. Now that door closes behind a man who has lived half his life under the shadow of something he thought was buried. Inside the precinct, the mood is restrained. No celebration. No raised voices. Only the hum of systems doing what they were designed to do, finally aligning with patience, persistence, and time. Evidence is laid out again, this time with intent, each piece positioned not as a question, but as part of an argument. The fingerprint. The timeline. The contradictions that once seemed minor and now read like signals. Prosecutors move carefully, aware that the story they are about to tell must survive scrutiny sharper than anything the case has faced before. Cold cases do not get the benefit of doubt. They earn belief only through precision. The suspect sits alone, separated from the city by concrete walls and fluorescent light. The bravado seen in earlier interviews has faded, replaced by a stillness that feels heavy, contemplative. He asks for a lawyer. The room goes quiet. This is not failure. This is process. Investigators have reached the point where the truth no longer depends on words spoken voluntarily. It rests in records, in patterns, in the slow erosion of denial under the weight of accumulated fact. Whatever he says next will matter, but it will not define the case. The case has already defined itself. News breaks cautiously. Headlines appear, careful with language, balancing impact with restraint. Cold case cracked. Arrest made. Traffic stop leads to break. The community reacts in waves. Some feel relief, a release of tension they didn't realize they were still carrying. Others feel unease, reminded that time does not erase accountability, that ordinary lives can intersect with extraordinary harm. For those who remember 2001 clearly, the past rushes back with uncomfortable clarity. For those who were too young to remember, the story lands like a warning, a reminder that the city keeps its memories, even when people try to forget. The victim's family receives the call they have imagined in 1,000 different ways and feared almost as much as they hoped for. There is no single emotion that defines the moment. Relief mixes with grief. Validation collides with the knowledge that nothing can restore what was lost. Years of unanswered questions do not vanish simply because a suspect has a name and a face. Still, something fundamental changes. The waiting, once endless, now has boundaries. The silence, once absolute, has been broken. As the legal process unfolds, details emerge slowly, filtered through motions and hearings and the careful choreography of justice. Some questions find answers. Others remain stubbornly unresolved, lingering at the edges of the narrative. Cold cases rarely offer clean endings. They offer fragments, truths shaped by time, constrained by what evidence can still speak. Investigators accept this with a mix of satisfaction and humility. They know they did not defeat time. They negotiated with it. In quiet moments, members of the original team reflect on the early days of the investigation, on choices made under pressure, on leads followed and abandoned. There is no rewriting the past, only learning from it. Technology advanced. Databases grew. Procedures evolved. What once seemed impossible became inevitable, not because the truth changed, but because the tools to reveal it finally caught up. The lesson settles in: no case is truly closed until every avenue has been exhausted, until time itself runs out. The city absorbs the story and moves forward, as it always does. New headlines replace old ones. New emergencies demand attention. Yet somewhere beneath the constant motion, the echo of this case remains. A reminder that even in a place defined by speed and noise, patience can still matter. That a single overlooked detail can wait decades for the right moment to surface. That accountability does not expire. In the end, the cold case does not end with certainty so much as with acknowledgement. A recognition that the past has been confronted, not erased. The questions that remain are quieter now, less accusatory, but they persist, shaping the memory of what happened and how it was handled. For investigators, for the family, for the community, the story becomes part of the city's long, complicated history of justice delayed but not abandoned. As the lights dim in the studio and the final words fade, there is no triumphant conclusion to lean on. Only the understanding that the truth, once awakened, changes everything it touches. A routine traffic stop. A fingerprint that refused to stay silent. A cold case that waited patiently for time to catch up. And a city left to reckon with the knowledge that, even after decades, the past can still knock on the door and, sometimes, finally, it answers back. Time does not stop after an arrest. It never does. Once the cameras move on and the headlines slide down the page, the machinery keeps turning, slow and deliberate, grinding forward with a patience that feels almost cruel to those who have waited so long. Court dates are set, postponed, reset again. Legal language replaces emotional certainty. Words like alleged and procedural begin to dominate the narrative, draining it of the sharp edges that once cut so deeply into public attention. For the outside world, the story has reached its peak. For those inside it, the story has only shifted shape. In the courthouse corridors, the air is heavy with echoes, footsteps, murmured conversations, the distant slam of doors closing on private rooms. The suspect, now a defendant, moves through this space with a different posture than before. Gone is the illusion of invisibility. Every glance feels measured. Every pause feels recorded. He listens as arguments unfold around him, as pieces of his life are rearranged into exhibits and timelines. The past is no longer something he controls or edits. It belongs to the record now. Prosecutors build their case brick by brick, knowing that one weak point could bring the entire structure down. They return again and again to the same evidence, stress-testing it under imagined cross-examinations, anticipating every angle of doubt. Defense attorneys do the same, probing for inconsistencies, searching for contamination, for procedural missteps buried in decades-old paperwork. This is where cold cases are most vulnerable, not in discovery, but in translation. Turning history into proof is an art that allows no shortcuts. Outside the courtroom, the victim's family learns a new kind of waiting. Not the endless, hollow waiting for answers, but a structured waiting defined by calendars and court orders. It is different, but it is not easier. Each hearing reopens wounds in quieter ways. Each mention of dates and times pulls memory back into focus, sharper than before. Justice, they learn, is not a single moment. It is a process that demands endurance long after hope has been fulfilled. Investigators watch from a distance now, their role mostly complete, yet their connection unbroken. They replay the case in their minds during late nights, thinking about how close the truth came to being lost forever. About how easily that fingerprint could have remained buried in a box, misfiled, ignored. The realization is unsettling. Solving the case feels less like victory and more like survival, as if the truth itself barely escaped extinction. The community settles into a strange calm. Conversations that once carried fear now carry reflection. People revisit old assumptions, reconsider familiar faces, rethink what it means to truly know someone. The case becomes a reference point, a reminder shared quietly rather than spoken loudly. In a city shaped by constant change, it is one of those stories that lingers, resurfacing whenever someone mentions a routine stop, a minor infraction, an ordinary night that might not be ordinary at all. There are moments when the narrative threatens to fracture, when motions and objections obscure the human core of the story. In those moments, the weight of the cold case presses hardest. Because beneath every legal argument lies a simple, brutal truth: time was taken from someone, and it cannot be returned. No verdict can undo that. No sentence can rebalance what was lost. The system can only acknowledge it, name it, and respond. As months pass, the case settles into history in a new way, not as an unsolved mystery, but as a lesson written in margins and footnotes. Technology will continue to evolve. Databases will grow. New cold cases will wait their turn. But this one will remain as proof that silence is not the same as disappearance, that evidence can sleep for decades and still wake up intact. In the quiet after everything, when the microphones are turned off and the files are finally labeled resolved, there is no single emotion that defines the end. There is gravity. There is restraint. There is the understanding that closure is not a door that shuts cleanly, but a window left slightly open, letting in air that feels different than before. The city keeps moving. It always will. Yet somewhere within its endless rhythm, the echo of this case continues to pulse, a steady reminder that the past is patient, that truth does not rush, and that even the coldest cases are never truly frozen. They are only waiting, watching, enduring until the moment arrives when they decide to speak again.